the Financial Goddess channel, Federal Budget 2022 special. In this video, I would like to focus on the proposed measures by our current government in relation to the cost of living. There is three key things that you would have seen throughout the news media, news reports, and Josh Frydenberg has really focused on pushing that agenda through, and perhaps you're wondering, what does it really mean in real terms, and is there a real benefit to you, and if so, how big that benefit is. So the three key things that you would have seen floating around the social media and the news channels, it's in relation to the one-off payment of $250 for pensioners and other government benefits recipients, the 1,500 tax cut for low to medium income earners, and the third one was the fuel tax that has been halved by 50%. That's reportedly to kickstart where you should be able to see the difference at the pump in the next 2 weeks or so. So let's start with the first economic measure of the $250 payment to pensioners and other Centrelink or government benefits recipients. The government has framed that $250 a one-off payment that is supposed to be received before the May election into the individual bank accounts as a measure, a modest measure to help offset the tremendous increase in the cost of living. That tremendous increase that the government is talking about is something that we can all feel, from the increase in food prices to the increase in utilities and of course the cost of transport. However, it is a one-off payment. Now, if we look at the rates of inflation for 2020-21 financial year, there was 3.5% increase overall in the cost of living. The cost of rental properties has gone up on average by 9.7%, and in some regional areas even higher. Now let's have a look at what the current projected rate of inflation will be. And the expected rate of inflation, and you can Google that information yourself, it's nothing secret, it's publicly available, is further 4.9%. So we have 3.5% increase in cost of living in the last calendar year, and we're looking at further 4.9% increase in this calendar year. Yet the most vulnerable members in our society who are already struggling beyond belief, our elderly, our veterans, our single parents, people with disability, people on carers benefits, they'll get a one-off payment that coincides with pre-election of $250, and that is supposed to, according to the government, according to the treasurer, build the confidence and encourage people to spend more. I don't think personally that this measure is effective, especially taking into consideration the fact that the government would have been better off increasing the rates of the government support payments in line with inflation. By taking that simple, small step would mean that the current people in our society that are disadvantaged and need the help the most would not be better off, but would also not be worse off. They will remain in the same position. And we already know that pre the significant increases in cost of living, we have many people that were homeless, that were struggling. We have a lot of not-for-profit organizations stating that already the daily rate of which these people are supposed to live off is not sufficient enough. There is cases, hundreds and thousands of cases, where children are going to school hungry without breakfast, where they don't have essential supplies to school. Cases where people have to choose between which medicine they're going to buy, which script they're going to buy. Having have to choose between turning on the heater for the coming winter or putting food on the table. And instead of the government taking the opportunity to do what it says in its speech that it wants to do, which is to offset the cost of living, instead of taking that opportunity to adjust the payments in line with inflation, it's a one-off payment of $250. I'm sorry, but that's nowhere near enough to make sure that our most vulnerable don't get sucked into further and deeper into poverty. Now let's look at the second cost of living, assistance with the cost of living proposal from Josh Frydenberg. As a big spiel about $1,500 tax cut. That's incorrect, and it's quite a misleading statement. What it is, if you look at the detail of the white paper that I've got here right in front of me, which is the details of the federal budget, what it is an increase to low to medium income tax earners tax offset. What that means is that physically the taxpayer will never receive the $1,500 in their pocket. A tax offset is something that is applied to your tax return after the end of the financial year, when you go ahead to lodge your tax return. Furthermore, the low to medium income tax offset is non-refundable. At least historically, it has been non-refundable. There is nothing in the budget that would indicate that that's changing. Tax cut impression and gives you an idea of a situation that somehow every low to medium income tax earner will have this $1,500 in their pocket. The second thing is, it is not specifically $1,500. The $1,500 is the maximum amount that the taxpayer would be entitled to. When you look at the actual breakdown in the white paper, it's divided into thresholds. And the trend is that the higher you are on the income scale, the higher you get to the $1,500. So for example, a taxpayer on $90,000 a year will get the full benefit of low to medium income tax offset of $1,500 being applied to them. On the other hand, somebody on $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 a year is looking at about 1/3 of that, $600 odd. Now, that sort of tax offset once again fails to help those that need it the most. I would argue that the person on $30,000 to $40,000 a year needs more of an economic relief because they feel the pressures of the cost of living a lot more than a taxpayer on $90,000 a year. It also means that our young generation is most disadvantaged. It means that our casual workers, our part-time workers, those people that were in hospitality, in the tourism industry in the last financial year, they are the most disadvantaged. Not to mention that this tax offset is a one-off. It's just applicable if it applies to your circumstances only for this financial year. And what it is we had a low to medium income tax offset in place during the pandemic for the last few years. It was $1,000 odd, right? And people didn't even know that. They didn't even really feel that because of the impact on the overall tax equation and the government reducing work-related expenses that you can claim in thresholds, making it harder for people. So all they've done is said on top of that, we'll put extra $420 to make the combined $1,500. But that's one off. They also have said that coming to 2022-2023 financial year, the entire tax offset for low to medium income tax earners will be scrapped. So that's not just the $420 that is being added as part of this federal budget, but also the $1,000 odd that individuals got used to in the last couple of years that helped to minimize the tax that should have had one when they've lodged their tax return. So ultimately, it is yet another temporary measure by the government, in my opinion, just to get your votes through. And again, bear in mind that the tax offset is not the same as money in your pocket. There's a huge difference between the government putting $1,500 into your bank account and saying, hey, do what you need. Put the money towards your electricity bill, put the money towards your medical, feed your children. There's a big difference between the government giving you the freedom to have that money in your pocket and for you to decide what is the most urgent, pressing need, and the difference between a tax calculation happening in the background where most people will never see the real benefit in dollar terms. Because the reality is, if when you lodge your tax return, there is nil tax payable, the government's not going to turn around, as far as we know today, and put that $1,500 into your bank account. So when you lodge your tax return, if there is nil tax payable, and I keep repeating it because it's very important for you to understand, if at the time you lodge your tax return and your tax accountant claims all the deductions for you and you end up with nil tax payable at the end of the year, you will not see the benefit of that $1,500 because it's a non-refundable tax offset. Unless government changes legislation around it, and I cannot speculate on that at this stage. They haven't indicated that they will. So one would assume at this point in time that the low to medium income tax offset will remain as is, which is a non-refundable tax offset. You will not see that benefit. It's just money on a piece of paper. So now let's move on to the third measure of how the government is planning to help you offset your cost of living and the cost of inflation. And the third thing to talk about is fuel, the cost of fuel. It's not a surprise that since the war started in Ukraine, the price of fuel is now sitting on average at about $2.10, $2.12 a litre, depending where you are within Australia and whether you're in metropolitan or original town. I had just taken the liberty to look back at the historical data of fuel for June quarter 2021. And at that time, we were sitting at $1.42 a litre on average, and there was already an 8 cents increase from the March quarter 2021. So we have gone from $1.42 to now $2.12. That is an increase of 70 cents a litre in a period of about 12 months. Everyone in their budget has felt that increase, from your individual pensioners driving to the shops and the doctor's appointments, to families that drive the children to school and extracurricular activities, to taxpayers commuting to and from work, and those in the line of business that requires you to travel to clients, your tradies and your other mobile service providers, as well as big corporations in our transport industry. And as a result, it had a snowball domino effect on the additional pressures when it comes to paying for our groceries, as the cost of transport makes up the component of how much you pay. Now, if you're based in the original town, like I am at the moment based in Cairns, our cost of transport has already been tremendous prior to the cost of fuel going up. And right now, it's at the point of ridiculous. Now, furthermore, the economists are expecting that as the war progresses, by the end of this year, there is talks of the cost of fuel potentially reaching $3 per litre. So of course everyone is feeling the pressure. Now what the government has proposed to do, that initially they rejected, was to slice the cost of fuel tax. At the moment the cost of fuel tax is 44.2 cents per litre. So the government in this budget, as their measure to offset the cost of living, has decided to slash the cost of fuel by 50% to 22.1 cents a litre. And according to them, it will take about 2 weeks before you'll see the drop in price at the pump. However, this particular measure is, like the other two, only very temporary, in that the government is only proposing to do that for a period of 6 months. By the end of September, it is proposing that it will go back to its 44.2 cents a litre. As part of the government's budget is to, of course, the investment in infrastructure and in the roads. So let's look at the numbers. Currently, the cost of fuel for you as an individual, as a business, has increased by 70 cents a litre in a period of the last 12 months. The government's proposed measure will offset it by 22 cents in the coming 2 weeks. But there is still that extra 50 cents more a litre that you're paying at the pump, that every person and every business is paying at the pump, that impacts on your cost of living. And the government is silent about it. The so-called cash splash, as it has been labelled in the media, I feel like it's money that has been misplaced and hasn't been put to good use. I don't think, frankly, that a $250 one-off payment to government benefits recipients will make any difference to our economy apart from creating a greater deficit. What I would personally propose, and what I would have liked to see in that budget, is to make sure that the government payments are indexed in line with inflation. So we had 3.5% last year and 4.9% this year. You may wonder where I would think that money should come from. Like I've mentioned in my last federal budget video, because of the war in Ukraine, the cost of commodities have gone up, and Australia is rich in commodities. Therefore, we are expected to make a lot more money than originally budgeted as a result of the increase of price in commodities. It is that increase in price of commodities that should be given back to the people. And that will be a much more practical measure. Right now, they will be worse off. And right now, the one of $250 feels like a great waste of money. Don't get me wrong, every dollar counts. Nobody's gonna say no to money, whether it's $1, $5, $500 or $2,000. Every dollar and every help is welcomed. However, a one-off payment of $250 to over 6 million government benefit recipients, what are we getting in return for that money? The government thinks we are going to get confidence in the economy. I don't think so. The government thinks we're going to get an increase in spending. But that will be a one-off spending. Assuming that the $250 that the government gives to the government benefits recipients, once it hits their bank accounts, majority of people will be spending that on food, will be spending that on catching up on bills, especially now that in March, usually we get the electricity bills coming through. That's what the $250 will go towards. You're not going to see people all of a sudden going on holidays with it or dining at restaurants. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to see people spending on discretionary spending. That money is just not there. So to me, it's a waste of government funding. It's a waste of an opportunity not to address that issue. Now, in addition to making sure that the government payments should be adjusted in line with inflation, the other thing that I would like to have seen is increase in the government benefits to reflect the cost of living. As I've mentioned earlier in this video, many not-for-profit organizations are currently advocating for the government that the daily rate of which people need to live on is just not sufficient enough. That was pre the inflation. So working with those figures, that needs to be addressed as well. Now, in relation to fuel tax, the 50% reduction is welcomed. What I would like to see is that program extended for at least 12 months, for at least the full federal budget, so that we can see how the situation evolves in Ukraine, how that impacts on the price of commodities, and then after 12 months of close monitoring, determine where do we sit with the fuel tax. The way that it sits at the moment, as have been picked up by media correctly, is that whoever wins this election, if that measure is legislated now, which it is, whoever comes into power, whether it's Labor or Liberals, they are bound by that piece of legislation. And that means that at the end of September, when the fuel tax needs to go back to its original rate of 44.2 cents, all of a sudden it will feel like a big jump of fuel prices. Bear in mind that we don't know what the cost per litre would be. Could stay the same at $2.10, I doubt it. There is a talk of that going up. So really realistically, we're playing a catch up where the price of fuel is going up, but we get to the end of September and the fuel tax goes back to its original rate. Whoever is in power, whether it's Labor or Liberal, from that particular standpoint will be irrelevant. And if it's Labor, then they will end up being blamed for the increase of fuel price at the pump at the end of September, which is something that a decision they are now inheriting. So, in conclusion, the three key measures that the government has been talking about, which is the one-off payment of $250 for pensioners and government benefits recipients, the $1,500 tax cut, and the 50% fuel tax cut, all three measures that are designed as the key elements to help average Australian with the cost of living are not sufficient, are only very temporary, and I do not believe they will produce the results that the government wants to. They will not create the desired outcomes. Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please click on the subscribe button